All right. Assalamualaikum, y'all. Today we will be going live with Medina Tenour Whiteman. Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum.
How are you?
So great to have you on board.
This is amazing. I've never done a live stream with Pakistan before. So it's a first time.
It's the first time for both of us. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so good. It's so good to see you. And you look so beautiful, mashallah.
Well, mashallah, you look so lovely. It's really nice to see you in the flesh because we've interacted on Instagram for probably
Yes.
like 2 years or something.
You've constantly been an inspiration for as long as I've known you, and starting from my fascination or infatuation with Daniel Abdul Haymour's poetry, and how my style shifted towards Sufi poetry. I mean, we have always in our literature books we were acquainted with the Renaissance poetry. Then we were introduced with the shamanist poets, and then suddenly we get to know the poets like Daniel Abdul Haymour, and they're bringing in so much brilliance and incorporating all the modern themes, it was like oceans apart. Like, we're not acquainted with these things. Why are we not acquainted with these things? And then I can get to know your work, and I was like, oh my God, how does she do it? And you have this you have so much passionate aura. Like, you have such a reformist spirit, and in my circle, that's something that I struggle to find someone who can with whom I can talk. You know, the how you have that you are so much political. You have great political consciousness, and how you delve on a totally whole new level. That's something that I think 99% of the world was not acquainted with. And then you have this brilliant piece of work, The Invisible Muslim. Please
Yeah.
introduce yourself.
Ta-da!
Wow, it's brilliant. And the red does the justice. How this is magnetic and powerful. How the current is there. It's big.
Oh, it's very sweet of you to say all these things. Thank you. I hadn't really thought of myself. I've always been very sort of marginal in a way because, and the reason I think what led me to being asked to write this book, because I wasn't naturally inclined to writing about being a white Muslim, because it felt like a very kind of awkward thing to write about. Partly because I didn't want to put a bit of attention on myself. Here I am being white, being, unusual or whatever, like exotic in some weird way. But actually it is quite strange to be kind of in between, like two circles joining, and then you have this sort of this overlap where you're part of this community and you're part of this community. And it's somebody's just commented, tell us more about the Invisible Muslim. I will talk a bit more about it. What led me to writing it was just that it's something that very few people are aware that they even exist, that we even exist, that there are even European Muslims. For one example is Daniel Abdul Haymour. He's probably one of the more better known ones. And he converted to Islam 50 years ago, in 1970, and made Hajj in 1971 or 72. About the same time as my father became Muslim, my mother also around the same time, although they didn't know each other at that time, they met afterwards. But there was a whole cohort of converts at that time, and it was very peculiar, like they would sort of travel to North Africa or to the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and some people were in Pakistan and Afghanistan actually as well, and Kashmir and places like this. And then they would come back and they would have, adopted certain customs because as Muslims they felt that this was actually in some way appropriate. But like now we would look at that as cultural appropriation. So it's quite a complicated topic because, are we entitled to that? Are we entitled to that?
Are we entitled? Yes. So when we say that this is a very complicated topic is because I think there are a lot of terminologies created that if I want to search something, what I find is the biggest problem is that there is a term and then under it there's a whole literature. For example, if there is Creole, if there is cultural appropriation, but at the same time there is this theme of diversity and how to navigate in those waters. That is very complicated. And someone like you who has physically traveled, whose parents have traveled, well, in a constant state of movement. And it is said that you have traveled from Zanzibar, Istanbul, Sarajevo, Tibet, and Iran, right? And you were mentioning the experiences of Daniel Abdul Moore, that he even came down to India and Kashmir. Like,
no, he didn't go there, but there were some of his friends who did. There were some people who also became Muslim at the same time. He was living in Nigeria for a while, and he traveled in Morocco, Algeria, Spain. A lot of people ended up in the south of Spain. I haven't actually been to Tibet, but I was in Ladakh, which is a part. It's like people think of it as Little Tibet. It's almost more Tibet than Tibet because Tibet has been occupied by the Chinese, and so culturally Ladakh has more. It's more kind of preserved. It's preserved that culture a bit better. But so this is, yeah. But having come back from India, because I actually was only in what I feel like was the kind of really Indian India. I was only there for a very short time, like maybe a few days. I flew into New Delhi. We went to Manali. I went by bus to Manali, and then I met up with the team that I was going trekking with. Then we went to Ladakh, and we spent most of the time there. When I came back to England, I thought I still had my library card for SOAS, which was the university I went to, the School of Oriental and African Studies. And they had, that was like the go-to place, you know, for any kind of research on this sort of stuff. So then I started, because I'd seen a Ladakhi Muslim, someone had pointed out to me, among all the Buddhists in Ladakh, a guy who looked very similar, like ethnically, he was pretty much the same, you know, the same kind of clothing. He had a few differences. He had cut his hair short, and he had like a very short beard. But apart from that, he was very, very similar. And someone said, that's a Ladakhi Muslim. So then that kind of blew my mind. Because basically, and this is what we're talking about, diversity, most of the time we have quite a provincial idea about Islam and the Muslim community, and we tend to see things through the lens of our own community or the ones that we're familiar with. But actually the Ummah is very, very, very diverse, and people say that it's the most diverse religious community in the world. I mean, that's maybe arguable. Christianity has also a very diverse community, but you know, it goes from West Africa to like all over Africa. It goes to Southeast Asia, to Central Asia, to Eastern Europe. You know, there's a huge kind of range there. I mean, just between Iran and Iraq, there's like ethnic, like linguistic, cultural differences, and they're neighbors. So like, it's something that just constantly amazes me that we have all this diversity, and it's not appreciated. We just sort of assume that we just kind of go, well, they're not real Muslims. You know, quite often you hear this from a lot of Black Muslims have said this, that they've had treatment that you know, people have, that's my son in the background. Hello. You're live in Pakistan, come. That they have been often sort of treated as though they're not real Muslims, or that, you know, they're somehow kind of outside of the fold or lesser or something like this. And I mean, my experience has been very different. What I think a lot of converts feel, and I'm not a convert myself, I'm a child of converts, so my experience has been a bit different. But for a lot of converts, I think that they have had this sort of dual experience. On the one hand, being kind of having to fight to belong somewhere, like I'm just sort of taking all of this sort of culture on, and is it really me, and is it really authentic? But I really believe in it, so I really feel like it's right. But then some people maybe act as though I'm not really one of them. You know, like one detail I didn't put in my book, actually, I forgot to put in it, which was very apt. To be able to go to Iran to show that I was married to my husband, they wanted a Shahada certificate. And I'd never done Shahada because I was born Muslim and raised Muslim. So really, I had to go to the mosque in Granada to actually formally say Shahada and get a piece of paper that would give me a visa.
Oh, God.
Which is just kind of funny, because if you were Iranian, or if you were Saudi, or if you were Pakistani, or if you were Somali or Sudanese, it would be expected that they would accept you as you. Yeah. So there's a certain dimension there of like having to kind of convince people, and sometimes being treated as a spy, or as an interloper, or is this really real? Are you just, you know, having a fleeing, you know, like
Yeah.
sort of Richard Burton, one of these adventurers who'd kind of like Orientalist adventurers, sort of putting on the clothes, pretending to go native, and then kind of coming home and writing really horrible things about them well. So I have heard from a number of people that they've had this kind of experience. And on the other hand, hold on, guys, shh, shh, that's like fighting. And then on the other hand, sometimes being given privilege treatments, you know? So we also have white privilege, which most white people we don't even notice. We don't realize that it is privilege, you know? It's like screaming, boy.
Yes, you have in depth. There was one experience that you have related, you have narrated in your book, in which you say that you got into a bus and then there were just white people who asked you to join them so that they can make fun of the black ones, right? And then you said that you are one of them, and that put you in a position that that they were questioning you, and then at the same time they were surprised that you were with them, like that you were in a sort of a position that there were, and you use the word whales a lot. I want to get to that too. And so that it kind of puts you in a position that if I'm taking side, who's there, it kind of puts you, it does ring a bell. Like if I'm taking a certain side, that I have the right to, and that I should, and I know that one part is unjustly being treated, right? But and you don't get that kind of solidarity from the other end. That is extremely complicated. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, it's interesting. I just finished reading a book actually on this topic called Passing, and it's very much about how people who have passed from one identity to another, I mean, consciously, either because they had to just save their lives or because it felt like the more authentic thing to do. The fact that you are able to disrupt this binary of us versus them at all is very interesting. I mean, if you exist in this kind of margin between two groups, it starts to blur the lines a little bit. And I think actually a lot of people find that frightening, because it gives some kind of sense of security to think, right, this is where these people belong, and that is where those people belong. That kind of ghettoization mentality, you know. And that's what spurred segregation. It's what spurred every kind of racism and every kind of, you know, religious segregation and ghettoization and, you know, persecution, really. Of making a boundary that says, right, you don't belong here. Oh my gosh, guys! Sorry, just give me 1 minute.
I just got the time to attach my battery.
You've got to be quiet now, okay? Please.
You didn't.
Goodness. I'm so sorry. I'm amazed anyone's still watching.
I just attached my battery. All right, you were speaking on a very important thing, on the ghettoization, how much guts it takes, and how much, okay, more than guts, it takes the level of understanding, the consciousness, how the multiple jeopardy that is existing, right? So
it's very risky. It's risky to cross over into to cross that kind of ocean and get to this other shore, but actually it's like a lake. It's actually all one shore, you know? It's just you're taking a different angle. And unfortunately, and the other thing is that when people make these kind of groupings, they think it makes sense because superficially, maybe it does. You know, this is, you know, basic racism or colorism is like saying people of a certain skin color belong over here and then people of a different skin color belong there. But it's very superficial. I mean, apart from all the experiences that go along with being of a certain skin color, but that is all socialized. It's 99% of that is just going to be, or 100% of that is going to be to do with how society treats you, or what your parents have given you, and that's all valuable. We shouldn't kind of just pretend that we're all completely the same. And the kind of the myth of being colorblind is damaging in its own way, because it's overlooking the different kinds of experiences that people have, and it's assuming that we're all one and we all get along, and it's kind of like toxic positivity.
What would be the word for this color blindness? What would be the word to defeat this notion of color blindness? What dispels the notions of color blindness?
I don't know if there's a word for it exactly, but I think the concept there is just listening to and accepting other people's perspectives and recognizing that they're all valid, and being able to say, okay, so women's perspective is valid. I'm not just going to assume that I understand them if I'm a man and mansplain it all away. Which is gradually, it's becoming less acceptable. And, we do have to thank feminists for this, and we have to thank campaigners and activists. And I have so much admiration for, Black American writers and African, also Caribbean writers, people who have really fought to highlight these inequalities. Because, in a way, they've been really had to, had the most at stake, because they've suffered the most for it.
Yes, like Angela Davis. Like I just absolutely love her so much, and she just took it down to the next level, the incarceration level, and how the females are being treated within those kind of incarceration, and the role of education and the role of books in educating. And so this was one thing that I wanted to say. If we read post-colonial literature, and we see that the most biggest canons being Edward Said and Frantz Fanon, and yet we have Leila Abu Leila, who says that Frantz Fanon is amazing, but how can he just go so deep and separate this element of spirituality? And that is where Medina Tenour gets in.
This, I think, is going to be my next book, but it will take me a long time to get to, because I think to be able to integrate, I think what puts a lot of Muslim women off feminism is that it's kind of sold as a very secular thing. It's like, traditional religions are patriarchal, therefore let's just get rid of them all. And they do make some very important points there, but at the same time, if somebody is a believer, or if they have some kind of spiritual tradition, it can be difficult to integrate that as well. You might really love some aspect of your faith or your religion. You don't want to just get rid of it and throw it out the window. So I think that's a big, there are Islamic feminists and Muslim feminists, definitely people who've really worked to trying to establish those rights for women, and that the right of not just rights of freedom of choice, who to marry, choosing who to marry, for example, or choosing how to dress or things like this, but really establishing ourselves as subjective beings, to accept the subjectivity of the female, experience, and legitimizing it and saying we're not just adjuncts to a male experience. We're not just kind of in the shadows, like supporting. We have the right to just really speak and witness and hear and think, and all of those things are totally coherent, and we can be the center of our own circle. We're not just on the periphery of somebody else's circle. Somebody commented below, actually, which culture do you found more welcoming? Well, it's a good question. I think it's interesting because within the Muslim world, there are lots of cultures that all kind of share a common bond. So Bosnia, for example, has a very specific culture. It's very Slavic. It's Eastern European, and I wrote about it in my book. Being in Bosnia and feeling very much like I was coming home. Like the landscape is like something from a grim fairy tale. There's wild ponies, there's bears, there's wolves, there's like pine forest, completely virgin landscapes. I mean, it almost looks like the industrialized era didn't happen. But at the same time, a large proportion of them are Muslim. Not all are, but there's, it's very established. It's very rooted. It feels completely natural. It doesn't feel like it's been imported. It's like this belongs here, we belong here, this is our reality, this is our truth. But they're very different from East Africans. They have like a different culture. Their way of life is different. Their environment is different. You know, there's lots of reasons for that. Their language, food, everything. Their whole history is different. But then there's always this quality of welcoming a guest, which you find also in non-Muslim cultures too. It's not just Muslims, but typically going out of Europe, you find it a lot more. Americans are very welcoming as well, depending on what you look like or what country you belong to. But no, there's lots of Americans who are so big-hearted. Like they're the biggest donors to charity in the world, the US.
Wow.
So they're very, very generous people. But that's one thing I really found about Muslims from pretty much anywhere. There was something that kind of connected them, which was that they would really pray for you. You know, like I met this woman just the first time I ever met her, and my second book had just come out, and it was the travel guide to Islamic Spain. And often, you know, if you're a writer and or if you have any kind of achievement like that, sometimes you'll meet people who'll be a bit kind of like, oh, well, yeah, congratulations, you know, kind of almost be a bit sort of funny about it. And she was just like, tabarakallah, tabarakallah. You know, she was really genuinely so happy for me and really just blessing me, you know, like, may it be blessed. And I went to visit, I went to stay with some friends of friends in Leeds when I was promoting this book, The Invisible Muslim. And I never met this woman before. She's British Palestinian, but she was a friend of my sister's, and you know, we had various people in common, and I sort of reached out to her. We chatted a bit before, and I said, hey, this is maybe, you know, crossing a line or something, but would you mind if I come stay with you just for a couple of nights? Because I was reading at the University of Leeds about the book. And she was like, yeah, of course, come and stay with me, don't be silly. She's also a northerner. Northerners in the UK are a lot more like that. But she was really like, you know, I really pray that this book is a means for you to enter Jannah, you know.
Wow.
Like, that's the kind of thing that you just don't hear definitely not in secular society. Nobody's going to pray for you.
Yeah.
But just that kind of warmth and that generosity of spirit, you know, just like, I am so happy for you. I'm happy for your success. That's something that we've really lost. And I feel like we've really lost it in European, you know, maybe Western society. It's a very big generalization, but in Europe, I mean, I live in the south of Spain, which is it's kind of closer to North Africa, and it still has like a lot of the sort of, you know, Muslim culture still kind of alive in a way. Or maybe it's just we're, you know, Mediterranean, warmer people, I don't know. But there is a bit more of that, you know. Oh, you look so beautiful, like complimenting one another. And that sort of kindness and that warmth and that openness is definitely present here as well. But that specific thing of praying for people, praying for somebody you don't even know. Yeah. You know, I've never come across that before, and I think that really comes from a religious mindset. I'm sure if you if you are in a Jewish community or in a, you know, strong Christian community where people really take their religion and their spirituality very seriously. I mean, you know, in Europe there's lots of people who are Christian because they go to church once a year and they don't really, you know, they're almost like lay people. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I'm going to say now.
I mean, what you're trying to say is that we always attach an element of eternity that makes that thing just timeless and touching at the same time.
Isn't that? And
you've also used this. You're speaking of. You also in the beginning of the interview said that I have seen the most diversity within the Muslim cultures. Right, and then there's this with the veil, which is seen as a symbol of Islam, but for her the veil is about the moments when she felt divided or separated due to race, gender, or faith, amongst the other factors. So there's this. You constantly talk about this veil in which, and we see that the concept of veil is basically a very spiritual concept, in which we're trying to come pure and being united and to be able to see our beloved, our Lord, our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But you have incorporated that, incorporated that in this us and them binary. What was your inspiration? What's the insight here?
Well, that came directly from reading W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote a brilliant book called The Souls of Black Folk. And that was really one of the first kind of, how do you describe it? It was a very impassioned plea. He wrote this book. He's a mixed race himself. He wrote this book in 1920. It came out in 1920 in North America. And it was still at a time where black and white were completely segregated. And, you know, until the early 1970s, we still had the sort of echoes of this. Today, we still have the echoes of it. But he was writing, you know, to say a little bit like, what was her name? Sojourner Truth.
Yeah, Sojourner Truth.
Called Ain't I a Woman? So it's very similar. He's really just sort of saying, we have souls. That's all he was saying. It's all he was saying was just like, we have souls too. Like, don't just assume that we're these kind of subhuman beings. Like, we have feelings. And if you treat us in this way, we're going to feel like this. But he describes a veil. He says he felt shut out from the world by a vast veil because physically he was separated. He couldn't enter certain spaces. And also I think he kind of had a crush on a white girl. And he realized he would never be able to be with her. He couldn't kiss her, he couldn't hold hands with her, he couldn't be seen with her. Like, it would actually be potentially courting violence. Like, it would be really quite a risky thing to do. Hi, Nagasaki. So, which is just interesting because then, the veil is very symbolic. And in the Quran, the word hijab is used to describe some kind of curtain or screen rather than a physical garment. And that later came to be kind of associated. And it's all about whether we want to reveal something or whether we want to hide. So there are certain aspects of ourselves, of course, we want to hide. Like, most of us do not want to walk out in the street naked or in our underwear. We would feel uncomfortable. So we'd all be cold or sunburned or whatever. There's lots of practical reasons for veiling. You know, there's also, interestingly, the classical Islamic ruling on building houses was that the outer wall should be high enough that a man sitting on horseback couldn't look over. So, you know, there's a traditional riyadh. I don't know how houses are traditionally built in Pakistan, but I imagine there's some echo of this as well. In North Africa, for example, like old towns in the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula, you would see, you know, buildings that have an inner courtyard. And the same in Spain, in old buildings in Spain, they will also have an internal courtyard. And on the outside, it's quite grim and forbidding and almost ugly. People don't really pay much attention to the front. They paint and make it look nice, but there's not really any decoration on the front. And then you go in Spain, it's called a fawan, which I think actually does, but I don't know the original word. And it's like a kinked corridor, so that when you open the door, you don't see straight in. So that's a kind of a veil. You'd have to turn a corner, and then it opens out, and then it's like, oh, we've made it into this kind of inner sanctum, which is like a beautiful patio with orange trees or a lemon tree or something like this, and maybe a little fountain, and it's cool. Like, all the houses here are built the same as in North Africa. They're built for the heat. They're built for the summer. And in winter, people just are expected to wear lots of clothes or, you know, build a fire and sit around the fire.
Oh, God.
Now it's mid-November, it's still sunny outside. Like, we don't even hardly need to be, we haven't got the heating on. So
I'm wearing a sweater here.
You're wearing a sweater. Is it cold where you are?
Yeah, it's getting cold. It was really cold today, and it also rained here.
And it rained. Whereabouts are you based? I don't even know. I'm sorry, I should have asked.
It was a beautiful weather. It's whole day. It's just blissful showers. I'm totally taking it as positive signs of all the beauty happening today, and my going live with you for the first time. And yeah. So if you're saying that so when you're saying this veil, are you trying to say is that though that the effort needs to be made on the part of the white, so that they can see the beauty within? And what kind of effort would that take?
That's an interesting take on it. I mean, I think there's different kind of ways that veils are used. They can be barriers. There's like the kind of Gaza West Bank wall type veil, or the Trump, purported wall keeping out Mexicans, which would have been completely pointless anyway. But you know, there are walls that are designed to keep people out, and those are walls that, up to a certain point, you know, most people want to have privacy. They want to feel protected, but it gets to a point where it becomes so opaque that they can't see the other. And then the people on the other side are kind of like, well, hang on a minute, I have relatives on the other side. You know, what about, for example, Palestinians who have to get into Jerusalem, for example, to visit their family, and they have to kind of go through checkpoints. It starts to become absurd, because actually we are not delineated or delimited as human beings into these kind of sectors, you know?
Yeah.
It's not neat. It's not neat like that. So these veils, it's like if you're wearing a veil, if you're wearing a physical kind of garment, you're not going to wear it all the time. Sometimes you take it off. You know, it's not for everyone. You don't have to. It's like, it's only a kind of, for example, in Iran, they have, not all women wear chadors anymore, but some still choose to, but they'll usually they have to wear some kind of garment that covers like their middle. And so they wear what's called a manteau. It's like a coat, like a long coat, which is actually very flattering. They make them really beautiful. I mean, they're very stylish.
Yeah, with the vivid colors.
Yeah, and
I love the colors.
They make it really stylish. But then, you know, when you go inside the house, you take that off. You actually take off all of your kind of outdoor clothes and change into indoor clothes. So there's like a really strong delimitation or delineation between the public and private spheres. And that's also something that, you know, a lot more in Muslim cultures, where, you know, public and private are kind of a lot more clearly delimited, I think.
Divided, as in delimited, as in divided.
Separated. Yeah, that's an example of where you know, that kind of veil is sort of like a semi-permeable membrane. It's not like a sheet of steel. It's just
that word, yeah.
And it can come on, you know, it can be changed, and it's sort of a bit more fluid and flexible. Whereas, you know, a wall that's made of bricks and mortar with razor wire on the surface, that's a kind of a very violent veil. It's a veil that's deliberately made to shut certain people out and deprive them of certain freedom of access, or freedom of accessing certain things that they might want to have. Like maybe it's education, maybe it's food or medicine. You know, think of blockades, you can think of sanctions. These are all kinds of violent rules that are restricting something that shouldn't need to be restricted.
Yes.
You know. Yes. So it's an interesting one. I guess it's all a matter of not seeing things quite so monochromatically, and to sort of understand that there is fluidity between identities. There's fluidity there needs to be fluidity of connections between other human beings as well. If we kind of barricade ourselves into this little castle of us versus them and all those kind of barbarians out there, we deprive ourselves of the opportunity of learning from them, you know? Yes. And it creates this kind of ivory tower mentality, you know, like,
wow,
we get it all because we have this, you know, over like an oversight, you know. And that's very much the legacy of white Europe and the colonial powers, you know, colonialism, that idea that we understand more than anybody else, kind of thing.
Yes. And I'm going to pose a two-part question. You have said, you have taken a very strong stance in recognizing the power of the white privilege, and you have taken a really strong journey within yourself to find all the barriers that did not allow you to speak on this topic, and how your Muslim identity helped you. How did your Muslim identity, what role does being a Muslim, Sufi Muslim, plays here in corroding these barriers and coming out strong against all these prejudices?
Well, that's a very important point, because ultimately, whether or not I'm Muslim, I would like to challenge those barriers of privilege, because what's often, there are studies that show that people who go to kids who go to very wealthy private schools, for example, like boarding schools, who are separate from kids of lower class backgrounds, socioeconomic class backgrounds, they actually lose empathy for them. They actually, it destroys their compassion for them. So that was one thing that I was really afraid of. I didn't want to be placing myself in this kind of pedestal, or to be placed on a pedestal either, both ways. Because actually, often if you're a white person, you're traveling in the Muslim world, quite often people will be like, wow, you're special, you're different, amazing, So this was something that I found very challenging. Like, for example, being one, and like a lot of women have plastic surgery. They want to change their noses, they want to change their lips, they want to change like lots of aspects, the hair, the eyebrows. And to a certain extent, I'm kind of like, wow, I just want to, celebrate their love of, creativity. On one side, it's very creative to, just experiment with beauty and fashion and whatnot. But on the other hand, it's like, are they trying to look like me? Like, that's really horrible too. Because, and this is something that Afua Hirsch said in her book, British. She said, beauty is the first racism. And I think that's probably really true, that beauty standards, white beauty standards have been rolled out across, quite deliberately for 500 years, really. For as long as
I had this craze in my childhood for Barbie, for having blue eyes, And I still have two Barbies. And then growing up and coming out of that, it was not easy. Yeah. Why is there's only Barbie there and then this brand Barbie?
I wonder about blondness, that there's this kind of, if people are going to dye their hair, quite often they'll dye it blonde or they'll make it lighter. Not always, maybe they want to make it red or purple, but there's definitely a kind of a popularity there for blondness. And that kind of makes me, and I'm naturally blonde, but embracing nature might be better. Yeah, exactly. Like, why can't we sort of edit those prejudices that we have? And it's not just appearing magically in society. It's been kind of quite deliberately fomented through magazines, through Hollywood, through even Bollywood now have adopted quite a lot of these ideas. Like, I know people whose like white Italian daughters are dancers in Bollywood, and in the UK there's an Asian bridal magazine, and they have white women on the covers.
Yes,
this is so damaging.
When I was as a kid, there were educational schools and they were putting up advertisements, and the students that were on sitting on the tables and on the chairs, they were the white ones. I was like, what? And I'm still like, what? Why can't you use the real people?
Exactly. So, and advertising is a classic example of, fair and lovely. There's just even the wording that's being used. People just take for granted how powerful that is. And especially for young children, girls, being presented with a certain vision of beauty, and they see that they're admiring them. And they're getting some kind of power, like some kind of social power. I'm beautiful. People are appreciating me. I'm going somewhere. I get a modeling contract or something. All these things send all these messages. So that was one thing that was kind of freaked me out, and it made me think. How much damage have we done? Apart from taking land and literally taking food out of the mouths of people who have grown it and causing famine,
She's saying it's Glow and Lovely. Yeah, it transitioned to Glow and Lovely.
They changed it.
Yeah, they changed it. It went really viral. It's going to be Glow and Lovely.
Glow and Lovely. And also like the names of skin tones that they use in makeup as well. That's also become quite polemic, light, medium, dark, brown. It's like and normal. That was another thing, is it was a certain kind of, I don't know, like a wheaty kind of or sandy kind of color, and it was being described as normal. And there were some Black Americans who were like, hang on a minute, what are you saying? That I'm abnormal?
Yeah.
So this is what really needs to be challenged, it needs to be called out. And companies, once they see that there are people who are upset about something, they will actually usually make some kind of effort to change. But it takes quite a lot of, people bringing their voices together. So yeah, to go back to your question, this was one thing that I think, being Muslim and having traveled in these kinds of areas, I started to become aware of my whiteness in a way that maybe I wouldn't have done had I not been Muslim and just stayed at home. Of course, I could have not been Muslim and then just traveled anyway, and I may still have come to those kinds of conclusions. But I think being Muslim had encouraged me to travel outside of Europe, maybe more than I would have done. So then another point, though, that I wanted to make was that as a Muslim, and particularly this is something that Sufism really encourages, being aware of adab. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kulul Islamu adab." All Islam is adab. Right? It's good, beautiful etiquette, beautiful. I think this is an interesting word to explore. Like, how would you actually translate adab? Right? Every Muslim knows what adab means, but it's like, when you really get into it, it's kind of like mindfulness, consideration, thinking of how your actions will impact others. So like, this has an impact on environmentalism. Like, we can talk about environmental adab, like having adab with the earth,
Wow.
Really, such a beautiful attitude to take. If we were to incorporate that and make it not just a list of, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, but like really kind of contemplating what adab actually means. Also, in terms of racial equality, like if we would actually behave with adab towards one another, we wouldn't railroad or talk over people or gaslight them or assume that they're talking rubbish and they're just being hypersensitive. We would actually sit and take the time and listen. And, who knows, inshallah, kind of get out of our little cloistered privilege mentality and accept if somebody's giving us feedback saying, your behavior is hurtful in some ways, we would actually be able to take that on and mature in some way. Because this is kind of very bluff. This is what, going back to the veil image, privilege kind of wraps you up in all these kind of muffling layers, which are like a veil, and they just basically prevent you from taking criticism in a way that makes you kind of have this fragile ego, And it's the same, any kind of privilege, I think, not just racial privilege, but wealth privilege, gender privilege, cishet privilege. I mean, you can talk about any kind of privilege. If you are used to being in this kind of comfortable, favored position, so much so that you think that that's normal and that's right and that's your due, that's what you're due.
You're right, yeah.
When somebody tells you that actually that's not fair, you're going to be like, what? And it can create a really juvenile response, like a kind of like, shut up, like almost like a teenager being told they need to clean their room. It's like, you just need to clean your room. You don't need to get kind of funny about it. So I'm just going to tell this on the TV down. Boys, can you turn the TV down? I can't hear myself think, please. Can you turn it down, Bree? Oh, sorry. Watching cartoons. So the other aspect, I think, that connected my faith with my desire to sort of, approach this and go through this kind of process was muhasaba. Muhasaba is a very central feature of Sufi practice. And, I can't say that I'm like this super duper, as my nephew. Hi, Tarek. I can't claim that I'm this super Sufi or anything like this. But, certain kind of teachings trickle down. And I think in the interest of making it relevant, in whatever sphere you're in, whatever culture you're in, whatever language you're speaking, and I think this has been part of my work as a writer, as a poet, as a songwriter. I feel like it's really important to show that Islam belongs in all of these different cultures, that a Sufi song doesn't have to just be in Arabic or Persian or Urdu. It could be in any language, it could be, and it already is in Malay and Somali and Swahili and in Wolof. Like, there's all these different languages, and we're not quite celebrating enough all of this diversity. And then it just means that if you're living in the West, whatever your ethnic background, because there's lots of Muslims who are mixed, who are second generation, third generation, from all different places, but who feel like they they're really from that country. They're from Europe, they're from the UK, or they're from the US, Canada, Australia, to be able to feel like I can be Muslim, and it's not like an either or. It's not like I have to either be a Westerner or a Muslim, that they're actually compatible in some way. But it takes a little bit of work to kind of see that they mesh, you know. But yeah, so muhasaba is basically, for those who haven't heard that term, it's basically calling yourself to account. So at the end of the day, you might sort of think through what you've done, or maybe it's not even a daily thing. Maybe it's just every so often when you have a chance to just engage in some reflection and to just sort of go, could I have done that differently? Could I have done that better? Did I end up upsetting somebody unnecessarily? Was I abuda? Was I just actually speaking out of ego and kind of being defensive when I could have taken on what that person had to say?
Yeah.
And I think this is something that we just have to do if we want to grow, you know, surrendering, exactly. Kind of just recognizing we haven't got it all sorted, we haven't got it all figured out. We're in this process of learning and exploring, and we're not finished articles, you know, we're still developing, and the only way we can do that is by recognizing when we've made some mistake, we've made some kind of error, and it may be that we were just ignorant at that time, you know. I look back now and look at my writing from just a few years ago, and I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have used those terms, I wouldn't have written in that way if I'd written it now, you know, because I could see that there's othering in place, there's some mentalism or some kind of exoticizing, which I'm more aware of now than I was 5 years ago.
Yes, it's a process, like a long process. Like, it's a belt of ignorance.
Exactly. Yeah, there are veils of ignorance. So there are veils that you want to keep in place because they benefit you, because they protect you. For example, also another thing that comes to mind is the intrusion of artificial intelligence in our lives. For example, through social media. Kind of ironic we're using social media right now. But, you know, the more time we spend on the internet, the more our behavior is being recorded, you know, all of our choices, all the things that we make, from the number of seconds we spend looking at an advert, all of that is measured. All our behavior is being measured online. And that's to benefit people who want to advertise to us and change our behaviors. Yeah. So it's well worth watching The Social Dilemma if you're interested in that topic. Sorry, I've lost what I was going to say.
You were talking about
the veils of ignorance.
Ignorance,
So internet privacy is a kind of veil. Like, we don't want to let our identities completely go because we don't want someone to steal our identities and impersonate us and things like this. But then ignorance is also very veiling. It can prevent you from seeing something. And if you're the kind of person who wants to see and who wants to learn and wants to be aware and not just live in a kind of a fishbowl, you know, in a little bowl. It's really essential to be able to kind of, it doesn't require facing your fear in a way, because it is potentially, I mean, I think the benefits outweigh the dangers of it, but there's a part of most of us, it's like we don't really want to see, because it might upend everything that we know or everything that we think about ourselves.
So it's a kind of a self-denial, and it's damaging to yourself, number one.
At the end of the day, it's not going to hurt another person for you to not know about them. Well, it could do. It could hurt them, actually. But it will be you who hurt.
Yeah.
So,
God.
And like, do you want to be the result, do you want to be the cause of someone else's suffering? I mean, ultimately, I think that's something that we just need to kind of bear in mind, that we're capable of either causing suffering or preventing suffering. So, which would be what we do.
So this whale that you have incorporated in your book is a multifaceted whale that is not just existing in the physical, but within everyone, especially those who are just surrounded by this ignorance in the first place. Wow. Okay, so I have one more question in which since we are spot on this topic, you have said and this is really going to be helpful for everyone. You have said that Islam is like a water, right? And whatever it is like a it takes the form or shape of that container.
Yeah.
Can you please elaborate on that? I think that is something that is so beautiful, and then that the world needs to know this thing, and from your perspective, like, this is wow. Water.
I can't remember who it was who first articulated that. I think I may have read it in a book by Imam al-Ghazali even. But it just made perfect sense to me, because it's like, I mean, apart from the fact that, first of all, that analogy reflects the fact that Islam is transparent, it's clear, it's colorless. It is beyond, it's not that it is colorblind, it's just that it is beyond color. You can make it look this way or that way. If you pour it into a blue jug, you know, a blue glass bottle, it'll look blue. If you put it into a pink glass bottle, it'll look pink. And it's very fluid. It's incredibly fluid. This is what it seems to me, especially the more I learn about Islam, the more I learn about it, the more flexible it seems.
Yes.
Even the pillars of Islam, you think of them as being pillars, right? They're described as kind of arkan, you know? But they're more like the tent posts. Like, they're still movable. Like, if you...
Like they're bamboo. They're like bamboo tree.
Yeah, they're sort of supple. There's still some suppleness there. Because, you know, look at Hajj, for example. You're only expected to do that if you have the funds for that. Fasting, you only do that if you're healthy. If you are pregnant or menstruating, or you're ill or mentally ill, or you're a child, you don't do it. If you're traveling, you don't do it. Prayer also, if you're traveling, you put the prayers together. It's much more flexible than it seems from first view. So that's another kind of beautiful thing about that metaphor, is that it is so kind of fluid and flexible. But another thing I like about it, thinking about it now, is that water is really essential and so blessing. You know, it's so blessed and so necessary. It's like it's a very deep cellular kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there is an aspect of Islam. Of course, there's a kind of a legal side to it, of course, and a historical side. But there's another side to it that's just very, very, very deeply natural. It just feels like, yeah, this feels completely right, you know? This is just, it's like I didn't know it already in my cells, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that we all share. That is something that literally every human being on the planet shares. We all share that kind of cellular makeup.
The cellular makeup. Wow. Because this statement of that Islam is water. It forms in any shape that you put it into. So myself, I am now learning that Islam is flexible, and in my childhood it was something that was grim. But then through our personal journey, we see how wow, it's how nourishing this is. But then in a world where we are surrounded by religious fanatics, and at the same time the xenophobics.
Yeah. Yeah, you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yes. So that water is the answer. How?
Yeah, I mean, if you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, you want to be like water, don't you? Because actually the only way that you're going to get through that is to be like a stream, and to find the easiest path. And I think there is a line, I can't quote the exact wording, but I believe that there is a line in Quran that says, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, make it easy for people, don't make it hard.
Yes, wow.
Because if you make it too hard for people, they won't manage it. You know, at the end of the day, they'll see ya.
Exactly.
That's a huge shame. And I'm sure people will accuse me of wanting to kind of water it down, talking of water, and sort of make it too sort of wishy-washy or something like that. But I think at the end of the day, if you want to open the doors of faith, you have to just accept the fact that you got to take people kind of as they come. And, you know, people will change and people will evolve and everyone is going to go through some kind of process, but not to kind of expect everyone to just be perfect when they first arrive, or that they'll ever be perfect. I think it's a really essential aspect of just any human path to recognize that, we are human, we are flawed, we do make mistakes, and that we're not sort of unlovable because of that. We're not all just going to be thrown on the garbage heap, So yeah.
Beautiful.
But again, I'm also speaking from a position of privilege because I've been raised in a society in a situation where it hasn't been expected of me to fulfill all of these kind of religious.
All right. I would love to add. I'm sorry. You said this is very important. I want to know your perspective, and so there's also one part in which you say that it's very hard to navigate because when either people, when they see that you are white, they either they question it, and then there's this patriarchal element in which there was this guy who told you that this is not how you wear hijab. Like, why are you wearing hijab? So you said, I'm a Muslim, and then you said, but that's not the right way to wear hijab. Your hairs are being shown. Yeah, you can see your hair, and you were like, my religion is in my heart. I really want to hear your perspective on that from a person with a white background.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't know how different it is for me being white, but certainly when I was in East Africa, there was always this kind of friendly joshing. Everyone was kind of pushing and shoving a little bit and like trying to sort of needle you a little bit to see how you'd respond. But it was kind of in a friendly way, a bit like cousins, when cousins get together or siblings, you kind of just like rough each other up a little bit. And this guy, he just sort of said quite, and this is something that I've noticed in a lot of Muslim sort of environment. People will just kind of say to you something that you're doing wrong. To the point where like you could be praying and then people are like moving your arms around and like, you're not doing it wrong. And that can be really infuriating. And coming from like a European Western background, that's really shocking. Like people
policing.
Don't tell
that's a moral policing.
It's like complete opposite end of the spectrum, and so as a result, we don't take it well. I mean, I remember also being in Iran, and people have this very much. I think it comes down to that hadith of enjoining good and forbidding evil, and so it's like people take it on as their kind of civil, like civilian police kind of deal. Yeah, like we need to make sure that everybody's doing things right, and I get it. It comes from a good place. It comes from, they're just trying to help you at the end of the day.
They remind the believer, right? The hadith,
exactly.
Remind the benefit.
But it's something that I think as Westerners, we're really not used to doing it, and so we often react really badly.
As a kid, when I was learning stuff, I was to like wear. There was this part of me that wanted to wear, but then I was also told that your hair from here it should not be shown, from here it should not be shown. And today I'm like this. I'm like, okay. This for me is like it's from the heart. It's gonna come from the heart. And then my heart is gonna. So there was this thought that came into my mind like once that probably if I'm not wearing hijab here. If I go abroad, I will wear hijab there. And that was a kind of a rebellion within me.
That's really interesting. That is a really interesting way of looking at it, because I would take the opposite view. Like if I go to a Muslim country, I just wear hijab because I'd be like, I don't want to be pointed out. I don't want I want to kind of stir up anything that I can't deal with, especially if I don't speak the language. Just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to go with it. Like, it's like, if you want to climb a mountain, you just have to wear a certain kind of clothing, and that just is your ticket to being able to, to climb that mountain or whatever. Like if you go to the beach, there's a certain kind of dress code, or you go to an office, there's a certain kind of dress code. And disrupting that dress code is like attention seeking, or I don't know, not necessarily attention seeking, but it would attract attention.
It would provoke. Yeah,
it would be seen as provocative in some way, even if you were just doing it quite innocently. Yeah. But it would definitely be taken that way. So, but yeah, and being here, for me to wear, I mean, I like wearing a scarf when I'm like online, because it's like, again, I'm kind of forfeiting a certain amount of my privacy by appearing online. So I want to take back a little bit of that by at least kind of going, right, I'm just going to even symbolically cover part of myself to show that I'm not giving everything away.
Yeah.
But when I go out to the street, if I go down to the supermarket, I probably won't wear one, you know, because I know, again, if I walk out in a headscarf, then people will be like, who's she? You know, what's she doing? And it starts just getting a little bit like, you know, just tiring. You know, I just don't
It's
kind of
tiring that with all this education and all this progress, we still wind up in this ignorance, and that we have to just debate on little basic points, basic human rights.
The thing about the actual hijab, the way that, you know, Muslim women are expected to wear a headscarf, it ends up being really frustrating that it is all reduced to that. You know, someone contacted me recently saying that she'd taken off her hijab and she was having a really difficult time. Her community were not being supportive at all, and they were speaking badly about her and all kinds of things. And she said, you know what, if I'd stopped praying, they wouldn't have been as upset. They wouldn't have been as upset and bothered if I'd stopped praying that how upset they are that I've taken my hijab off. And salat is one of the pillars, and the hijab isn't. Yeah. So that's, I think, just kind of how upside down it is. That it's like, modesty is a beautiful thing. It's wonderful to celebrate it, but again, it can end up being policing women's bodies, because it's like, you're not doing what I expect you to, and I'm going to be taking it upon myself to tell you, you know. Yeah. And it's, there are other ways of doing that. There are other ways of approaching that, you know.
But men are never policed.
Yeah, exactly.
Neither Muslim men are never policed. The white men are never policed. That the question never comes to a man, like, ever. Yeah. He would never be marginalized because of a certain way that he looks.
Or talked about as if he's some kind of womanizer, you know. And this is what's really crazy. In Iran, I noticed that there was a fashion for men was to wear very slim shirts, you know, to sort of show off their muscles, and like slim, or kind of Western dress, you know, trousers. But, you know, when you're sitting down, it's like, you can kind of get an armhole. Yeah. And it's like, so that's okay. And nobody's going to point that out. And then a woman showing her arms is going to be told off. Like you know, if you're going to make it that rule that everyone covers, then everyone should cover, you know? Yeah. And actually, traditionally, in Arab countries, men did. They would wear thawb, and they would wear, you know, a keffiyeh or something, and they'd be as covered as a woman, if not more.
Yes.
Yeah, that is one of the frustrations.
The frustrations that we deal with every day. Okay, so I have just two questions left, and one I'm going to start with. When I started reading your book, The Invisible Muslim, I was like, I could relate with the struggle of Muhammad Ali, the boxer. How Islam served as an escape and as a weapon to combat the indifferences or the arrows that privilege was showering everyone of the blacks with, and then your work, someone. So this is, you're someone with a white who knows how white privilege is supportive, but is using it as a positive mean to illuminate our post-colonial discourse.
I would want to think that was. I had a lot of resistance to writing this book, because I didn't want to talk about myself in this way, and it just felt very kind of weird and cringy. But at a certain point, I realized that actually what white supremacy does is it tries to protect itself by banning certain topics and making it kind of, oh, can't say that, you know. So then it made me sort of think, actually, I need to use my voice in this way. I need to sort of investigate, you know, kind of interrogate myself in this way, because I don't want to have that legacy of white supremacy in me in any way or shape or form. Like, it's not just a political reality; it's an everyday. It's so ubiquitous that people don't even realize it's there. That's what's really sort of shocking. but no, I keep forgetting the other thing I was going to say. What was the question again? Yeah, so, and then I've been wanting to talk, I wanted to write an article or a piece or just write some kind of response since George Floyd's murder, since Breonna Taylor's murder. I really felt moved to talk because I kind of felt like, why is it so hard for white people to accept that this is happening, that white supremacy is still a reality? There's all this fragility there that's kind of blinding them. It's veiling them, right?
And they're creating conspiracies around that.
Yeah, there's a lot of exactly because empire itself is insecure, and that's the reason why it barricades, because it's like somebody's going to take back what belongs to them that I've taken, and so I'm constantly afraid. So empire is perpetually afraid of the other because it's afraid of what it's stolen being taken back, and of course of losing the power that it's gained in the way. So, but then somebody said to me, you know, people will listen to you. So I was like, I can't speak out about this. It's not my space. It's not my time. I'm just going to be muted. I'm just going to, you know, listen and let voices of color take the forefront here. And then somebody said to me, but people will listen to you. And that was like, you know, that is actually a really good point, that, you know, perhaps there are going to be white people who might hear a black person, a brown person making these arguments and then just sort of go, oh, well, they would say that, you know, whatever, and switch off. Maybe that is exactly the kind of person that I need to be speaking to.
And that is why God positioned you and made you go through all this journey so that you could be the light bearer. Literally for us. It's not, yeah, we clearly understand when we come from Sufi backgrounds that we know that if a responsibility or experience is going through, that means that it needs to be expanded out as light for the world. So,
yeah.
And so if to keep it modest, you have to be that vessel.
Yeah, it's a tricky, you know, I'm naturally very exuberant, and I like to sort of, you know, I'm happy on a stage. I can sing, I can talk, you know, I'm not sort of shy in that way at all. But then there's also kind of, as I was talking about adab earlier, it's like there has to be an awareness of when I can't encroach in a certain space, you know, like here's this discussion. I don't want to encroach on that because this isn't my place. So I've been trying to be very aware of that, which is why actually this book has been very much about my personal experience, and it hasn't been like a kind of scholarly overview, because there are a lot of that really
would have not made that
and
that would have been boring.
Personal experiences, you know, as a vignette, to write a vignette is so much more fun, and it's more fun to read than just
directly quoted. The best part is that you have given direct quotes, and that makes it so real. And then you have a very beautiful writing style. It's like kind of like Charles Dickens as well. And then you mold that in. Then you mold, and then I also find this aspect of in your poetry. I find this aspect of Emily Dickens poetry as well, but incorporated in Sufism. But she was a closet poet herself. But I'm just talking about you. Like these two people, I really like. And there's some just writers that you just do critical appreciation. That's just one thing. But then there are certain writers who just appeal you. They just touch your heart, and you just remember the essence that those words had left. So, oh my God, Khadra Healing. Oh my God, hi, good to have you on board. Oh. So okay. All right, so these two writing styles of the two writers are incorporated in your prose. It's so weird. Your prose is reflecting that Dickens style, and then your poetry is reflecting the Emily Dickens style. And so my question is that
nobody's ever said that to me before. But it's true. Apart from now, I read Oliver Twist not so long ago, and I was like, wow, this is really anti-Semitic, and I had not even picked up on that before. But I mean, I'd read A Tale of Two Cities. I read a few of his books, and he has this kind of like cracking style, like he just kind of cracks along. It's not quiet and reflective, and somebody's thinking for a long time, and then a lovely description of the landscape. It's like really, and what I wanted to do with this book as well was to make it so that it wasn't just navel gazing. I mean, it is navel gazing in a way, but I wanted it to be fun to read and enjoyable and make people laugh, because especially if you're dealing with very painful, difficult topics, or topics that are in any way kind of polemical or challenging, you know, there's an Arabic saying, if you want to shoot an arrow of truth, dip it in honey. So
wow.
I like that.
And that's art. And that's an art.
I love it. It's kind of like, you know, if you want to sit somebody down and have like a difficult conversation with them, understanding them as a human being and like having an ego and probably wanting to run away, you kind of want to sweeten them up and like present it to them in a pleasant way so that they'll actually listen, you know. Which isn't to say that you shouldn't be angry or express anger. I mean, that is a whole other, you know, tone policing the scream of rage of oppressed people is completely wrong. Like, they have to be able to express themselves. However, rhetoric, if you want to speak rhetorically and influence people, and this is what advertising, marketing, script writing, Hollywood, all of this is all based on the principle that you can encourage people to feel certain ways by using language in a particular way. So there's a conscious choice there you can make. You can actually write deliberately because you want to draw people in and you want to, you know, welcome them into this idea, even though kind of knowing that it's going to be difficult for them.
One more question. That is something that I face as well, is that when you are writing prose, and since you are a poet, you are a mashallah songwriter as well, and then you have written this amazing prose and a memoir. So it's sometimes it's that when you're writing, you keep a certain rhyme and meter when you're writing, or it just forms in a flow. But when you how do you balance, and when you shift to writing prose, does that come in the way that poetry, then you see that you're writing prose and there's a certain rhyming coming here? How do you maintain that balance that keeps prose as prose and poetry as poetry? That's one thing that is challenging.
Discuss this because people try and define what poetry is, and then they'll kind of tear down each other's descriptions and definitions, because ultimately poetry is just what poets do, and it can look in loads of different ways. It doesn't even have to have line breaks. It can be like prose poetry. It can be lists. They can be acronyms. They can be all kinds of different things. I think with poetry, there's more of a feeling that there's like a spotlight on a particular moment in a particular time, and you don't really break it so much. You could do if you wanted to, but a really powerful poem, they don't tend to do that. They tend to really just look at that. It's like a hologram, you know, like you could get inside it and just step in and walk around, and all the sort of details are there, but it's really in that moment. It's like you've encapsulated a moment. And I think that's why poems don't tend to be very long, maybe a page long, because it's really encapsulating a moment. And in that moment, there's echoes and resonances of all these other realities as well, of history, of all different feelings and future and hope and longing and emotion. So it's like a multiverse. It's like a sort of a small one-page multiverse. Whereas a piece of prose, like an essay, is going to be longer. So you can diverge from that more. I mean, it's really beautiful to have that kind of clarity. And especially if you write an essay that is sort of vignette based, you're still going to have that sense of like a spotlight. I mean, a short story as well, it should be so kind of self-contained that you read the story and it's like you're in this alternate reality and nothing else exists. Like it's all completely coherent. You know, like a fantasy world, you know, that you enter into and everything makes sense. There's never any moment your mind kind of going, yeah, but what about this? And didn't she do this? And, you know, you completely surrendered and suspended disbelief. Whereas an essay, I really loved writing essays at university and even at A-level too, because you can develop an argument. And that's where, I guess, rhetoric comes in. It's more of a kind of, we're going to look at this topic. We're going to look at it from this angle. Now we're going to look at it from this angle. And then we're going to come back and look at it from this angle. And then we're going to kind of go, well, this is all very nuanced. And then we're going to come to some sort of conclusion. But within that, you can make it literary. You can weave in lines of poetry. You can make it song-like. You can create refrains. You can create a kind of aesthetic, you know, with the use of language. Sorry. It's like how, you know, in the Quran, obviously we're talking about something completely different, but one surah of Quran will have like a certain style. It'll have a certain style and aesthetic that is unique to that surah. And then you go to a different surah and it's completely different. Yeah. It's like a whole different world. Like the rhythm, the line length, the kind of rhyming sort of patterns that you feel in it, the refrains, they'll just be complete. Like I sit down to recite Quran sometimes and I'll find one surah very easy to read and another one really challenging. The sounds are very much more kind of complex and more complicated, but it's the same all the way through. It's not just, it's not random. So I think with writing an essay, you can kind of, people approach essays differently as well. Like they'll approach a short story just wanting to dive in and just kind of get lost, you know, and be taken away into some other kind of reality. They'll approach a poem, again, differently, because you want to have that whole feeling of like your chest being kind of opened up and expanded and your mind expanded, but in a very brief encounter, you know, like you have one page to do that, maybe half a page or a couple of pages. I mean, if you look at most poetry anthologies, most poems are like around about a page long. So you have a window of opportunity in which to just completely blow people's minds. And I think that's what people go to poetry for. They want their minds to be blown. But it's something that it's like you slow down, you read it more slowly, you go back and read it again, you sit and think about it and you're, oh, wow. Oh, and there's that reference there and that resonance. So it's a much more reflective kind of space that you go into. Whereas with an essay, you go to an essay because you want to be educated, I think, fundamentally. Yes. You want news, you want something different. You want your mind to be blown by science, you know, or by some idea that takes you out of your everyday mundane reality. And for a writer, they're also living in everyday mundane reality, but if you write an essay, that could be months or years of work and reflection, all going into this kind of concentrated piece. And yeah, I mean, you can tell I just love writing. I find it such a marvelous thing to do.
Wow, you just said everything. Oh my God, thank you so much for your time. And I know it's really challenging being a mother and just balancing and doing all the projects and then writing novels. You know, it's a huge thing.
Well, you can see the screaming coming back and forth, but in a way, it's like if you really want something, you're gonna push yourself to find the time, even if it means. I know a woman who wrote a novel getting up at 5 a.m. every day, and that was just the way that she wrote. She just got up, had a coffee, and had like 3 hours of very concentrated, intense writing time.
Wow.
So,
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. I'm so grateful that you just took out your time and you just elaborated everything so beautifully and so eloquently. And I hope that everyone who sees gets inspired and because you have done justice to all the questions. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Oh, mashallah, may Allah increase you. Ameen. Please tell the audience what you're doing. Is there anything you would like to share about the work, literature, or songwriting?
You know, at the moment, I'm just I'm doing a lot of promotion. I'm just like doing lots of events online, which is really fun because of the lockdown. It's kind of limiting in many ways. For me as a mother and an artist, it's actually been quite liberating because instead of having to book a flight to go somewhere, I can do an event with people in Malaysia or in the UK or in the US. That's been really liberating and really fun. Really interesting. I would really like to.
Thank you.
I haven't set a date for it. I haven't set a date for it yet, but I would really like to do a writing course. Like it would just be like an hour a day for a week, or over a period of weeks. I haven't quite decided yet, but it would be a 2-in-1 course about learning to grow a garden as well.
Wow!
So it would be drawing a lot of inspiration from gardening and planting and the whole process, the whole cycle, because it's all very resonant. You know, there are lots of resonances there. You can talk about the planting and fertilizing and watering and pruning. Pruning is like a big part of writing. Cutting it back makes it more productive, makes it more fruitful.
Wow.
That's one thing I'd like to do, but I haven't set a date for it yet. Inshallah, maybe in December. And other than that, what am I doing?
Are you coming out with new novel? You mentioned your second novel.
Well,
Inshallah.
it would be a second non-fiction book. I have actually got some novels unfinished, tucked away in some computers that have broken, and they're at the fixers now to see if he can salvage anything from them.
All right, we do look forward to it, and I hope it turns out greater than the one that you wrote now. Inshallah.
Well, and also I'd like to next year bring out another collection of poetry, and at some point I want to record music, but finding the space for that is very difficult for some reason.
Also, please tell the audience about the nasheeds that you sing in different languages and of different from different contexts. Just let us know about it.
So my dad was a musician from way back when, and then becoming Muslim, he actually was attracted by the qasidas, by the qasaid, devotional songs that he heard from Morocco. And that was what it kind of introduced him into Islam. And so because he could sing, he got taught all of the tunes that were traditionally used for this one divan of poems by the sheikh who kind of he embraced Islam with, really. And so that was sort of something that I've always learned as a child, and we used to sing these songs, still do sing them. Now we're singing them through Zoom. But so, and as a singer, it's always really appealed to me very, very much. Like you can sing, I mean, I love all different kinds of music, jazz, folk, flamenco, Latin music. I'm a big fan of Brazilian music, bossa nova, things like this. As a linguist also, I find it's a fun challenge to learn songs in other languages. It's a great way to learn a language. And the devotional songs, they just have a certain flavor to me. Like if singing is always quite uplifting, right? It floods you with oxygen and it lifts your mood. It's always something that is practically guaranteed to make people feel better to sing. But there's something about singing devotional songs in particular that it just has a different intention, and it is nourishing in a different way. It kind of feels like it nourishes my soul, really. So, but as a guitarist, sometimes it's fun to just take a song. Sometimes they just kind of lend themselves quite naturally to a guitar. So, because also one of the roots of blues is from West Africa. Well, I mean, you could argue all of the roots come from West Africa. And, West Africa is a place that has had Islam and Sufism for, best part of a century, best part of a millennium. So there's a kind of continuum there between North Africa, West Africa, Sahrawi songs, Sahrawi music. And then that always had a relationship with the south of Spain as well. And a kind of back and forth relationship as well. So again, we're coming back to the same topic of fluid identities and how we kind of relate to each other as human kind of bodies, as communities. That you can hear aspects of Quran recitation in flamenco singing. Wow. You can hear West Africa in blues, which then ended up going into jazz, which then kind of came back to Europe. And it's all kind of cross-referenced now and cross-pollinated. So there's something that's very kind of, very inspiring. I find that so inspiring.
Transcendental. That's transcendental.
Yeah. And the guitar was invented in Muslim Spain. So there's also a feeling of this is all related. This is all kind of quite naturally and organically related. So to pick up a guitar and sing an Arabic song from Mauritania kind of makes some sense, So this is one of the things I do. One of many things.
Wow. Please, people, just check out Medina Tenour's page and also her Cave Mom podcast. and she write great articles on that. Cavemum.com, CAVEMUM.com, and her novel, her memoir, The Invisible Muslim, and also her father's, yes, The Invisible Muslim. That's right. And also check out her father's page, Daniel Abdulhaimou's page, and support the campaign.
He's a friend of my father's, but I've been working on his page. Yeah.
Wow, awesome, awesome. All right, thank you so much, Medina. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for your time. Love you, and God bless you eternally. Ameen.
Take care. Bless you. Assalamualaikum.
Allah Hafiz. Thank you so much.
Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Allah Hafiz. Wow. All right, so I'm just gonna end it and then save it. All right. All right.